Ko rangi, ko papa, ka puta, ko rongo, ko tāne mahuta, ko tangaroa, ko tūmatauinga, ko haumi e tiki tiki, ko tāwiri mātea. Tōkana te rangi ki runga, ko papa tuanuku ki raro, ka puta te ira tangata ki te whai ao, ki te ao mārama. E rongo, whakairi ake ki runga, tuturo uti wakamaua kia tīna, tīna, haumi e, hui e, tāi ki e. E mihi ana ki a koutou, ko tai mai ki tēnei o ngā kaupapa, ngā hōtaka, ko te take, e whakatairanga i ngā whānau. Ko te ingoa o tēnei kaupapa rangahau, he waka e ke noa. Ko taranaki te maunga, ko Aotea me kura haupō me toko maru ngā waka, no pariaka, no waokina, he mokopuna tēnei o taranaki e mihi nei. He mokopuna anō hoki o te arawa waka, o tainui waka, me ngā mautere o Samoa. Ko Hinerangi Edwards tōku ingoa, ko au TTI ringaringa waiwai o te kaupapa nei, nā tūtama wahine o Taranaki i kawe. Welcome e te whānau. Thank you for joining us on this webinar session, whether you are watching it pre-recorded or if you are with us on this beautiful, beautiful day. I acknowledge all of your maunga, your awa, your waka, your hapori. I acknowledge all of your lived experiences and mihi to you in the mahi that you carry and the life that you carry as well. He Waka Eke Noa is a project that's been developed by Tūtama Wahine o Taranaki in partnership with Te Aratupu, Pūranga Kura, Te Wharewananga o Awanui Ārangi, Te Atawhai o Te Ao, Māori and Indigenous Analysis Limited, Kākāriki Consulting, Te Whānau o Te Rau Aroha, and Lalanga Training and Consultancy, with funding provided by the Ministry of Business Innovation and Employment. Aotea is here in support. I'm a director of Aotea, which was a Taranaki kaupapa primarily, and now is through the motu, particularly in the area of Te Wairoa Hoki. This session is being hosted in a webinar format, which means that no one can see you, including the panelists and our kai kōrero. We encourage you to use the Q&A function, which is located in the center of your toolbar at the bottom. You'll see Q&A. We've also enabled closed captions for this webinar, which you can start by clicking the CC. So if you go to your More button, I believe, you should be able to find captions on the toolkit there. This webinar is being recorded, and it will be shared with those of you who registered online, and will later be found on the Tūtama Wahine o Taranaki website. If you click onto their mahi, He Waka Eke Noa. The previous webinars are there for you to enjoy and to learn from as well. There'll be a short survey that will come up on your screen at the end of our session. It will take you 1 or 2 minutes, and we'd really appreciate your feedback on how the workshop, this webinar experience can be better for you, or what you enjoyed about it. Lastly, the video recordings from last week, as I mentioned before, are on the Tūtama Wahine o Taranaki website currently. Before we start our kōrero, we want to acknowledge that for many of you, your survivors, your healers, your fighters, your resistors, your liberators, and many whānau are at various stages of recovery and development. Some of the information that we're sharing today may be triggering, and we just wish you to look after yourself, and be that to get wai, have a glass of wai, open windows, but there are also other sources of support we're sharing 3 on your screen right now, but there are many other support networks out there. So we encourage you to, if you need to reach out and kōrero with others. Now, our incredible kai kōrero this session is Shirley Simmonds, and Shirley is a kaupapa Māori health researcher and adult educator, mother of 2 sons, Tamihana and Raukawa. She's a passion for Māori health and a focus on research and teaching that serves our aspirations of a healthy Māori population and contributes to the health system and research environment that meets the needs of whānau Māori. We're very fortunate, e te whānau, to have this momo Māori kura with us, sharing her insights. And in this session, we're looking at the survey Pairoa, and Shirley, e mihi ana ki a koe ko taimai ki Wainganui I tēnei huihuinga. Right now we have neke atu I te rima tekau tāngata I taimai I tēnei wā, and kare kore, ka rongo whānui o kōrero. Shirley, it's a pleasure having you, and just really looking forward to hearing your kōrero e hoa. Yeah, we'd love to hear more about you before your kōrero, and a bit about your experiences would be wonderful. Tēnā no koe.
Kia ora, he mihi nui kia koe hini rangi, nau tuwhiri I tō tātou koe I te ata nei. He mihi hoki kia koutou e hono mai nei tēnei ata a ipurangi. Ai, he mihi ki ngā maunga, ki ngā awa, ki ngā hapu, ngā whānau katoa ki roto I tēnei rūma a ipurangi nei. Ko wai tēnei, he uri tēnei o te waka o Tainui, ko Raukawa ki te kaukaro Pātitere, te iwi, ko ngā tihuri te hapu, ko piki tū kei te wao tū te marae, ki te taho tuku kuia, ko ngā puhi te iwi, ko manga muka te marae. He hononga hoki ki Ngāti Tūwhare tō, I te puaki ahau, I taupō. Nō reira, tēnei au, ko Shirley Simmonds, e mihi ana. Ai, he māma ahau, tokorua aku tama, ko Tamihana, te mātāmua, tekau mā whā o nā tau, rawa ko Raukawa, te pōtiki, tekau marua o nā tau. E noho ana mātou ki raro I te maru o ngā iwi katoa tauranga moana I te wānei, engari kōrero, ka hunuku mātou ki te tino kāinga ki te rohi o Raukawa o ngā tihuri. He me nui tērā kia mātou ki te hoki ki te kāinga. Ai. E tahi o ngā tino mahi kia hau nei ko te mahi māra, te mahi ngā kai. Kei reira taku puna mauri ora I te wāhi o rongo. Nō reira tautoko rawa hau ki te kōrero a hinirangi I te ata nei, kia koutou e whakarongo ana ki te puta, ki te timata I au kare a roto I roto I a koe I tēnei ata, tēnā kua whakamahi I te mahi pai ki a koe ki te piki anō ki I tō oranga, I tō ngāo, I tō mauri ora, nō reira. Ai, ngā mihi ki a koe hinirangi mō aua kupu I te ata nei. So I'm connecting on the Zoom this morning from Tauranga. It's a beautiful sunny day here. I've had to rearrange my desk a little bit so I don't get so much glare from the sun because my computer faces east, so I can look out onto the green as I'm doing my mahi, which is important to me. So I want to acknowledge the words of Hinirangi this morning. This has been a big kaupapa, this research project, He Waka Eke Noa, and also want to acknowledge the kaimahi that I worked with, Leonie, Linda, Ma, and I'm sure that some of you have connected just last Friday to the previous webinars. So hopefully our kōrero today can contribute to providing another aspect to the picture of the results that were discussed last week. It's always a little bit disconcerting talking when you can't see the rōpū out there. So I'm not sure what else you might want to know about myself, but that might do for now. I guess in terms of mahi, I'm a self-employed health researcher and have worked in the field for maybe 17, 18 years, thereabouts. Continue to learn, and that's one of the reasons I do love this mahi. And I try to contribute my energies to kaupapa that I feel will serve our whānau. So this has been a big kaupapa, he wake eke noa, looking at experiences of and solutions for violence in amongst our whānau. And as Hinerangi mentioned this morning, we are conscious that some of this kaupapa, some aspects of this are very hohonu and might touch some of us who have been affected by violences. So I do ask that, take care of yourselves. And if it means disconnecting and coming back at another time, kei te pai. Aha ko tērā he kaupapa nui tēnei. I think it is really important to explore this kaupapa where we can, so we get a deeper understanding and find ways and solutions for healing for our pathway forward. So that's some of the things that have come out of this research. If I might just share my screen. And okay, it's gone over to my laptop. Let's pull it over here. Can I just double check that it's up? Got a thumbs up from Hinerangi. Kia ora. So,
except we can see your desktop, Kari. So if you go back into your slides and then press the presentation button, it should. Yeah, we've lost it again.
Okay, let's try that again. Screen share. That one. Share. Apply.
Showing your slides.
Yep. All good. Kia ora, thank you. So he wake eke noa project. The session I'm going to present on is the survey. The project itself was a mixed methods project, and it consisted of a number of hui and interviews and so on that Leonie and Linda presented about last Friday. And it also consisted of a quantitative survey. So this morning we'll present the first part of the survey results, and later on this morning the second part. Let's see if I page down, kapa. So the survey itself, surveys are interesting things because they, in terms of research, they sort of sit at the intersect between being a quantitative method and a qualitative method. And you'll see as we go on that this survey in particular, while it did collect some quantitative data, so we'll see numbers, it also collected quite a vast number of qualitative data. So we got lots of free text responses from the respondents. And in there is quite a richness of data there. The survey itself, we structured it according to he korowai oranga, and it has roughly 4 sections or 4 aspects to it. Wai ora healthy environment, so this is whānau, where whānau sought help when following experiences of violence. Whānau ora healthy families, or the health and experiences of the collective, and mauri ora the experiences of individuals. And we had an aspirational aspect to the survey, which I think is really important. and asked whānau about what we feel we need for healthy futures of Māori. So the overall purpose was to identify the prevalence of violence and strategies for dealing with violence. And it was really important aspect of the study, was important to do, and largely because there actually has never been a quantitative survey done for Māori on experiences of violence, which is I don't know, that sounds like an understatement to say, but it's an interesting thing. And because we know we have experiences of violence, we know there are considerable experiences of state violence, and neither of these things have been researched specifically on our Māori whānau. So this was important to undertake this survey, and also really important that it was undertaken by a kaupapa Māori research thought group. So in the survey, we wanted to hear the experiences of our Māori whānau, and as I mentioned here, we used the pie order framework. And yes, we had all our research team was Māori and strongly underpinned by clear Māori values and principles. We followed a clear kaupapa Māori method and methodology. We had quite a rigorous process for questionnaire development. So this actually, a lot of it was undertaken during the lockdown time. So we had countless Zoom hui to really wānanga each question. And in these hui, we included practitioners, so those who have worked with whānau who have experienced violence, that they have worked with them for many years. And it was a hononga between the practitioners and the research team to work towards developing these questions. The other thing too was it was very strongly underpinned by kaupapa Māori principles, as I mentioned, and we tested or we would wānanga about each of the questions to ensure that they also met strong statistical standards as well. The survey was necessarily delivered online, and this was because we were in and out of lockdowns at that time. And I guess, you know, we, as Māori, we do generally prefer kanohi to kanohi engagement with our whānau, particularly with a topic like this that can be very sensitive to many of our whānau. So we thought very carefully how we could get strong engagement from whānau Māori, albeit online. So we used a process of whanaungatanga to use our networks and connections to roll out the survey, and had, you know, sometimes it can be described like a snowball effect, where it has an ongoing, somebody connects with somebody else, and then they connect with somebody else, and the survey gets passed along. And in that way, I think we generated quite a high number of responses. The other thing I think that really helped in this respect was that even though it was online, we tried to be kanohi ki te kanohi as much as possible. And I think that's also about our accountability as researchers, that we are the faces of the research as well. So I'm pretty certain this helped strengthen the engagement of whānau. We did want to, as much as possible, ensure the mana of the respondents is upheld. So we thought very carefully, for example, about the ordering of the questions. So we eased into the more potentially confronting questions along the way. There was a bit of a whakapapa to the questions of themselves. In terms of the structure of the survey, and we saw it mapped out a little bit earlier on in the pie order framework, this visual here maps out the questions a little bit further. So we had one section called ko aho, and that was questions that the respondents needed to answer about themselves, kind of standard ones that are often collected in statistical data: age, for example, ethnicity and descent. So the survey was, we required people to be Māori and to both identify as Māori and have whakapapa Māori. We also required of respondents to be located in New Zealand at the time of the survey, and we asked questions around gender and sexual identity. And these questions in particular allowed open space or free text responses, if you like, for respondents to identify themselves as they best saw fit. And you'll probably appreciate so many surveys sort of have one or two tick boxes in these questions in particular, and no space for those for the diversity and variation we have amongst our whānau, particularly in terms of gender and sexual identity. The other section, as I mentioned earlier, we had questions around the experiences of the collective. And in here, we ask questions on state violence, police violence, and media violence, and strategies that whānau have used to heal and minimise impact. So I think those are the two key sections that I'll present on this morning. And then later on this morning, we'll have the other three sections here, the experiences of the individual. And in this section, we first asked about respondents having seen or witnessed violence, and then following that asked about their own experiences of violence. Waiora, support and services. We wanted to hear from whānau where and how did they get support, or why they might not have sought support at all. And our paiora or aspirational wellbeing questions too. So in terms of the information about the respondents themselves, I think we had hoped for at least 1,000 responses, and this would give us quite robust data to draw on from the survey. We were, dare I say, pleasantly surprised to get over 1,600 completed responses. So this is quite an amazing and phenomenal number, really. And I do want to pause here a moment and really acknowledge those who took time to fill in the survey. I think it's a lot to demand some, time of our people. We have so many responsibilities and things that pull us in all different directions. To stop and take time to complete a 15 or 20-minute survey is actually quite a lot to ask. So I do want to acknowledge all those who took time to complete the survey. The other thing I will note too, and we'll see as we go on further, is while we timed the survey to take approximately 15 minutes, it was evident from the depth of responses that we got that many people took a lot more time and spent quite considered deliberation in filling out the survey, and that it was quite amazing to see. So it has provided us with quite a richness of data and a really precious insight to whānau experiences. So of this rōpū, approximately 80% identified as female and 17% as male, and approximately 4% chose to self-describe their gender identity in their own words. So this is one thing to note. With 80% responses of female, we are conscious that the survey responses largely describe the experiences of wahine. I think this points to the need for similar data being generated for those who identify as male or choose to identify their gender identity in their own words. So we were very conscious of this. We have in places separated out the data for these three groups. So we'll look at that as we go along. To try and see if there are any differences. The age range for the group was between 18 and 87 years. We had a minimum age of 18. The mean and median age was similar at around 49, 50 years. And in terms of geographic distribution of the respondents, on this map, you'll see where the red marks the red shading is. This is the higher concentration of those who responded to the survey. And it actually maps quite nicely, roughly, to the distribution of the Māori population overall. So we were quite pleased with that our survey had got out far and wide in a geographical sense. We are conscious, though, that very little representation from those on the West Coast there. So some results from the survey, and the first section is on experiences of the collective. And we considered this section both experiences of the collective and on the collective. And in the knowledge that if violence happens to one of our whānau members, we also feel it. So we were very conscious of the impact of lateral violence. And the questions ask around lifetime experience of state violence, just state violence in particular at this point. We had quite a broad definition of state violence. So the separate questions ask about neglect, failure to protect, abuse and abuse of power, experiences of racism from the state, and breaches of te tiriti. So the first question here, in your lifetime, have you or your whānau experienced neglect? For example, denial of access to social services from the state or government agencies. And you'll see as we go through, it was very important to us to give examples of these things. We were aware that some of these experiences, we might become desensitized to some of these experiences because they become an expected experience from the state, because we have quite a long history of the state not meeting our needs. So, for example, neglect we've described here with a brief example, denial of access to social services from the state or government agencies. In terms of the responses here, and just a note on these, most of these responses we've put up in as a pie graph. The shadings, the dark shading indicates a lot. So those of the survey respondents who indicated they have experienced neglect from state or state services a lot. The slightly lighter shading a few times, and the very light blue shading never. So effectively for this slide here, for example, if we look at the dark and the medium shading, these are all those that said, yes, I have experienced, well, myself or my whānau have experienced neglect from state or government agencies. So in this particular example, just over approximately a third stated they never have. So a point to note about this particular question is it really does depend on how many times you might have engaged with state or government agencies. It also depends on us knowing what we're entitled to know what we have denied. So a couple of things to consider if we consider the context of this question. We asked the follow-up question, which of the following state or government agencies did you experience neglect from? We did provide a sort of standard list of those we expected, and these are those that came in with the highest numbers. So first of all, the health system, HWEN's, Work and Income New Zealand, education system, police and justice system. There were a number of free text questions in here. One organisation that came up a number of times in there actually was ACC. The second question, in your lifetime, have you or your whānau experienced a failure to protect by the state or government agencies? Again, as similar kind of responses here, approximately a third, or just over a third, said never. 17% said yes, a lot, and nearly a half said yes, we have a few times. By which of the following? Again, the ones with the highest numbers, police, followed by health system, justice system, education, and HWEN's. In your lifetime, have you or your whānau experienced abuse or abuse of power from the state or government agencies? 23% stated a lot, nearly half stated a few times, and approximately 28% stated we've never experienced abuse or abuse of power from state or government agencies. By which of the following: police, health, justice system, education, and oranga tamariki? The next question: in your lifetime, have you or your whānau experienced racism from the state or government agencies? This one is a little bit different because there is actually a higher proportion who stated yes, we have, and a lot. So over a third, approximately 38%, stated we have experienced racism a lot. 47% a few times, and approximately 17% stated we have never experienced racism. And again, one thing I would note here is that it really depends on our perception of racism. One of the comments that came up was it can often be very subtle and we might not notice it in the moment. So by which of the following: education system, health, police, WHENs, and the justice system? These are some of the free text responses to racism. And these are direct quotes that were provided in the survey. My sons have been stopped by the police and felt the only reason was because of their colour. Having people not believe that I'm Māori, like I have to prove it. Racism, subtly, in a way that they think I will not notice. Everywhere. A further question: in your lifetime, have you or your whānau experienced breaches of te tiriti or waitangi from the state or government agencies? Again, a higher number stated they have experienced this a lot. So 44%, a smaller number there for a few times, and approximately 17% stated they have never experienced breaches of te tiriti. Again, it really depends on your perception of an encounter and being able to identify a breach of te tiriti. This list here is a little bit different from those we've seen in the previous questions. So by which of the following: the one with the highest number, customs and immigration, district or regional council, Department of Conservation. So I'm kind of conscious those two there in particular to do, with matters to do with our whenua, and then followed also by education and health system. And these are some of the free text comments: breaches of te tiriti, by which of the following? This is a difficult question. These organisations are all built on white supremacy and so are inherently racist, which is a very good point. Breaches every day from any government department and agencies. Breaching the treaty is a norm. Follow-up question on police violence, and this was a separate one in the survey. In your lifetime, have you or your whānau experienced police violence? Just approximately 9% stated a lot, which I actually think is a lot. One of the things about this particular question is it really depends on the survey respondent having encountered the police. So I'm kind of conscious that many people can go through their lives and not engaging with the police at all. So this data includes those people as well. So I suspect it could be an undercount. Approximately 43% stated a few times, and about half stated I never experienced police violence. In general, how much does the state or system violence impact on your well-being? 32% stated a lot. And nearly half stated some. Approximately 20% stated not at all. So this is an interesting question too. We've kind of wanted to get some perception of how the violence impacts our daily lives and you know, get a sense of that underlying, I guess, stress that this can cause our whānau. So the follow-up question was around ways for healing, paths for healing. So we asked, are there things you try to do to minimize the impact of state violence in your life? We had a number of amazing responses here. So those who stated yes, there are things I do to try and minimize the impact of state violence. Here are some examples of direct responses. Try not to rely on the system for anything. I attempt to fit in as Pākehā and act like I'm Pākehā. Educate myself and my whānau on what we are entitled to. This was actually a theme that came up a number of times around education and seeking information on our entitlements. Take trustworthy people with me. I try to connect with my hapu. Live on our whenua with our rules. And again, a number of times in these free text responses, we saw evidence of whānau connecting and with tikanga and Māoritanga as a method of healing. So the same question, are there things you do to try and minimize the impact of state violence in your life? So these are those people who responded no. Although interestingly, some of the comments were the same as those who said yes. So for example, I'm white passing Māori, so I try to use my privilege to protect and look out for my whānau. And this kind of speaks to the protection that those are afforded who can pass as non-Māori. And you might remember from the previous slide, somebody mentioning, I try to act Pākehā. I do not know where to ask for help, and it's very hard to trust others with so much discrimination and racism in the community, and those people hide behind happy masks. So I think this comment speaks to that underlying level of racism in the community, and you know, how can we trust the state when we have such a long history of distrust? Have given up asking for help. What can you do? And I think those last two there speak to a sense of, you know, kind of futility, if you like. So the next question, and this does look like a lot of data, but we'll go through it bar by bar, if you like. This question asks, in your lifetime, how often have you or your whānau experienced the following types of violence from media? So we're very conscious of the impact of the different types of media on our hinengaro, on our whānau, and particularly, I think, those who are isolated. Also, particularly throughout the COVID and lockdown times, I think engagement with media increased. And also particularly for rangatahi who have quite open engagement with, in particular, social media. So this question asks about media. It doesn't ask about specific types of media, so just media in general, and we left it to the respondent to decide how they might interpret that. The first question asked around negative portrayals of Māori, and again, the dark bar there indicates a lot, the medium shade bar there a few times, and the smaller one there that you almost can't see indicates they've never experienced negative portrayals of Māori from the media. So for that particular question, approximately 80%, no, actually almost 96% said yes, they have. The second question, racist comments about Māori in the media, similar data there actually. The third question, negative media slant on news stories, again, similar proportions. The fourth question asked around negative and abusive comments on Te Tiriti or Waitangi. Approximately 73% said yes a lot, 23% said yes sometimes, and just over 4% said no, not at all. Negative and abusive comments, around Māori language or culture. Again, we're seeing a similar pattern along here. Here, 75% stated yes a lot, 22% yes sometimes, and 3% not at all. Remembering too, this really is dependent on the frequency of engagement with media. So it does depend on that. The next question asked around aggressive or threatening posts on social media. So this was the one question that was specific about the type of media. 60% said yes a lot, 30% said yes sometimes, and around 10% said no, not at all. And the final question was, we asked around experiences of homophobia from the media. And this question in particular is really dependent on your own sexual or gender identity, and the knowledge that those who might identify, for example, as one of the LGBTIQ plus or takatapui groups are more likely to be sensitive to homophobic comments or so on from the media. So approximately 40% said yes a lot, a similar number proportion there said yes sometimes, and around 22% said no, not at all. So just remembering that that number there is, I feel also is an undercount, because it includes a huge number of those who don't identify as one of the groups, so are less likely to be sensitive to that type of violence from the media. Again, we asked around a general question to get a sense of whānau or individuals' underlying stress caused by media violence. So in general, how much does media violence impact your well-being? Just 11% stated not at all, and over a third stated a lot. And I think that's pretty critical. So that in general, you know, a third of our people have an underlying concern around media violence, and over a half stated some. So I think that's quite compelling data there that shows the impact of media violence, or even the threat of media violence, when we engage with the media through, whether it be TV, online, newspapers. I think this indicates that we have that expectation of a violence, and that it does affect our well-being quite considerably. Again, the question, a pie order question on things you do to minimize the impact of media violence. Some comments here from the free text responses. I'm in control of what I expose myself to. So a number of people talked about maintaining healthy boundaries around their exposure to media. Speak out against it as often as I can, and I think I was quite encouraged, I guess, to hear the number of responses that said something similar to this. I think it takes time and energy and courage to speak out against these violences in the media. So that was an interesting response. Write more positive stories myself. I like that one. Discuss it with family. And empower myself on facts about our true Māori history. Again, this theme of education and the importance of accessing data that, information that is empowering to us as Māori. So I'm not sure about timing, but this is a bit of a summary here of this first part of the survey responses. So just in this series of slides, we've looked at some of the study methods that generated over 1,600 responses from our survey put in the field in late 2021. The demographics, so the demographic profile of the respondents. And we've looked at some of the data that has been generated on state violence, police violence, and media violence. I just had a little look at the time, and I'm not quite sure of the timing, so I'll look to Hinirangi and the team there but I believe we might have some time here for questions.
Kia ora e hoa, e mihi ana ki ngā rangahau ko whariki hia ki mua i a tātou. Lateral violence. You mentioned lateral violence, and I think in my very naive comprehension, I understand it as an indirect violence that whānau experience when one of our whānau are experiencing it very, very closely. But could you give us examples of how whānau experience lateral violence?
Yeah, I think if, and we can probably all think of an example. If we know of a whānau member who has had a negative engagement with the state. So, for example, it might be a negative engagement with the health system, say, where they've sought help or advice or so on, and it hasn't happened, or something worse still has happened. So if we know of a whānau member who has had a negative experience like that, then that affects us, and that is a type of lateral violence. And how it can affect us as individuals is that we have that it starts to build that distrust with engaging with the system, and so we can be less likely to engage, and with good reason. And so that's, I guess, the bit of a cycle of the impact of that lateral violence. So lateral violence is a violence that will happen directly to somebody else that we have a connection to, and therefore we are affected because they are affected by it. There's probably a better formal definition of it, but I guess that's my understanding of lateral violence.
Why is it important for us to have a more broad definition of violence?
I think it is really important. I think it might not be widely known or acknowledged that the negative experiences we can have with the state in particular are considered a violence. So, and you'll see in the earlier slide, we had the different types, like neglect. Neglect from the state is a violence. Failure to protect. So you might remember some of the list that came up there, the police, the justice system, the health system. They're set up ideally to protect us. And a failure to protect by these states, by these organizations and institutions, is a type of state violence. So I think one of the interesting things about doing this study, and really, I mentioned earlier about the wānanga we did on each of the questions and each of the aspects of the study. It was interesting for me personally because I hadn't myself really teased apart the different types of violences that are possible, particularly from the state, but also when we come down to really looking at the types of interpersonal violences as well, which is in the next presentation. So I think it was really important to have that wide definition, to break it down, to give examples. And I think in that way too, that the survey itself becomes a type of learning tool for those who might partake in the survey, but also, now that we're at this point, for those who might read the results and gain a deeper understanding of state violence, so that we know it when we see it, when we experience it, so that we can be more empowered to either protect ourselves, advocate for change, or whatever it might be, to work towards well-being. And I think too, it's really important that wider definition is important for the state to see it, and for different services to help design services that fulfill the needs of our people better. Kia ora.
Shirley, you know, Paeroa, your model, you know, whānau ora and pai ora, like, how does whānau ora thrive when state violence and other forms of violence are addressed? What would we think we would see in whānau ora?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it would look different in different contexts. But to me, one of the key, I guess, goals, aspirations, and maybe tohu of whānau ora is rangatiratanga, is our whānau being able to live our lives freely as Māori and according to, you know, our own values and principles, and we're our own decision makers. To me, that's you know, there's a freedom in that, and in that there's oranga, so that we're free, we're empowered to live at optimal health as Māori. And it would look different in different contexts, but I think that is the ideal.
So just thinking about your response and being of optimal health and being free, how does our support networks help us to experience state violence in a way that, you know, I'm just thinking about, you know, the influence that we have on others is always smaller than the influence that we have on ourselves. So, you know, the whānau support networks, how does that enable us to be stronger, resilient, and able to, in those moments where we think, oh man, I wish I'd said that, you know, actually having those things there at the ready.
Yeah, really good point. And again, in the free text responses, we saw some comments that sort of referred to that. So a number of the responses said, I seek solace with my whānau. I, you know, like the one we saw that says, I take trusted people with me to engage. I talk it through with whānau and friends. So obviously, if there's been bad and negative experiences, the talking it through can really help. And I know myself, you know, you've experienced something, and you walk away and you think that was weird, or was that weird, or what was that? I've never had that experience before. I've never that didn't make me feel good, but I don't really understand it. And it really helps to talk with other people to unpack that. And it helps to find solidarity too, to know that others have had similar experiences. It's not just you. And so it's not something that should be just dismissed as well. There's real power in that sharing of those experiences. So we saw a lot of that in the free text comments. And also, as I sort of pointed out a couple of times, the real importance of then educating yourself. So seeking information on, for example, what your rights are in the health system, or what your rights are in the justice system, so that you can advocate for those rights, or help other whānau and individuals advocate for their rights. There were also comments in there about not only do we seek to educate ourselves on histories, on rights, and so on, but sharing it with tamariki and mokopuna, so that they are empowered as they, you know, go through their life journey, empowered from a young age. And I know, yeah, and there's real power in that, sharing with them what we at the sort of older and pakeke kaumātua age might have learned later in life, sharing it with them when they're younger in their lives, that there's a strength and an empowerment in that.
Mm. Polly actually asked the question that you've just responded to, and what I've heard you respond is that whānau can have support, have support of others who have experienced different things, and for solidarity, know your rights. And you also said about mokopuna, sharing and explaining with mokopuna and preparing them early. Are there other things that whānau dealing with these factors of violence can do?
In terms of state violence, I'm thinking about what some of the responses were. I think a big one was advocacy. I mean, we're not always empowered to change the state. I mean, that would be the ideal. But, as community whānau, hapori members, we're not always in a position to be able to change it. So I think the data there does provide some information that can, for those who are in positions of power, to advocate for change and make transformation happen. So that is important. But I guess at whānau level, we're not always there. But a lot of the responses talked about, we talked about it at the beginning of the Zoom as well, about the importance of maintaining your own well-being, your whānau well-being, and your own personal well-being, and being really conscious of that. And I think there's a strength and resilience in doing that, and ensuring the well-being of the collective as well. Yeah.
Whare kupenga here te pātai, particularly with regard to the research and its impacts. What impact at state level is expected from carrying out this research?
Yeah, we really hope it has an impact. We have had throughout the study quite close engagement with the rōpū who on Te Ao Rerekura and Marama Davison in her role. So she's come along to a number of our hui, and we've had good engagement with her and the team there. So hopefully that can help affect some good change. I guess for us as researchers, it's about putting the research out there and in a format that is understandable and usable as much as possible. We've done a couple of webinar series, and also I think we might have mentioned earlier, or the publication for this is coming out in December. So that helps. We really hope it's picked up by institutions and organisations that are in a position of power to affect transformational change.
And I think a number of the people who are listening to this webinar live and also later on, who are in positions to actually take account for state violence and to understand it would be very beneficial for us as well. And also with the media violence that you mentioned, Whare was particularly interested in there. Are we seeing changes, or was there anything in the research that sort of talked about the impact of time and how things that used to be normal are not normal anymore, and people are addressing these violences?
Yeah, I think in this particular survey, it didn't. It's a sort of snapshot in time, although it does ask about lifetime experience. It doesn't reveal changes, but I think our for ourselves, if I think back around media on TV in particular, I know there has been changes in recent years. There's still work to do. Definitely. I do have a concern around social media and the limited control of what we and our rangatahi and whānau are exposed to in terms of social media. Yeah. And comments sections. I think comments sections, particularly on social media, can be really toxic places. I'm trying to sit where I don't have the sun in my face.
Aye.
Taihua.
Living in Tauranga.
Yeah.
social media is a fascinating kaupapa, Shirley, and I do think, you know, it'll be interesting to see how we as whānau pivot and flex to support our tamariki not being exposed to state violence. But I also think that there is another side of the social media, which is that the children in our whānau are not sitting back waiting to 6 p.m. news to be informed with what's happening in the world, and also the impact globally as well as locally. There's a comment here from Sienna, and I've been trying to come to grips with lateral violence as well, and it also includes internal violence within a marginalised and oppressed group, a form of bullying, which is also called horizontal violence, which is organised, harmful behaviour we do to each other. It's important for us to recognise this type of violence which exists within our whānau and works towards ways of addressing this. Your thoughts on that in terms of that internalising?
Yeah, tautoko rawa. And I think it was really important that the survey explored state violence. And like I mentioned earlier, it hadn't been done before. It does provide a snapshot of state violence, of experiences, and also of interpersonal violence, as we'll see in the next section and so on. It doesn't, because it's a survey, doesn't link them all up, but we know it's linked, I guess. And that was a beautifully written comment, actually, I have to say. We know the context that we live in, and the ongoing impacts of colonization, how these violences can impact us as Māori. They can normalize those types of behavior so that they're repeated in our communities and accepted as normalized behavior, but also that these violences impact us internally. Absolutely, that's the ultimate impact of these experiences is our own internal oppression. And then I think that does manifest as outwardly in different ways, but one of those ways is the interpersonal violence that can happen between individuals and in amongst whānau. So I do think there's more research and work to do to pull this data together to provide that wider context. We sit in a context in our daily lives, in a context of ongoing colonial violences, and that does impact us. But we do too, and we see in this study, we do too have the solutions. A lot of them are in returning to our tupuna practices, and a lot of the free text responses talked about that, connecting with marae, connecting with my hapu, hoki ki te whenua, reo tikanga, and other, rongoā practices, miri, taiao, and so on. A lot of these responses came through. So we have an awareness of our colonial context and the ongoing violences and impacts on us, but we also have the knowledge of how we can contribute to our own ongoing healing and mauri ora.
How do you heal when the cause of the mamae still exists?
Yeah, I know. He pātai nui tira. And I think we need to be constantly healing. We need to be constantly working towards health and well-being, like in everything we do. Yeah, but but also, working towards transforming the system, working towards positive transformation for our people. But like I mentioned before, we're not always in a position of power to be able to do that. So those that are can and should take that responsibility for transformation. So those are decision-making positions, who run institutions and organisations and some of the state agencies that we saw mentioned there, at governmental level, local governmental level, those who are currently in positions of power have, I think, an obligation and a duty to work towards that transformational change.
Charlotte has a partai taking into the question about people who have never experienced any type of violence. Can you comment further on those findings?
Yeah, and that's a good question, because we presented this data to some rōpū Māori, and I distinctly remember somebody in the group saying, "Who are they? Where are they? You know, are there people who have not experienced violence?" So I guess in many ways these data are not surprising to us. They are very sobering. They're not surprising. They are what we expected. In some ways, it's kind of useful to see them, you know. But there has been some questioning around those who have stated they've not experienced violence. At this level of the data, we don't know the wider context of those who might have replied. But I just think back to some of the free text responses who said things like, "Oh, I'm white passing, so I can pass as," you know, this might not have been the words, but "I can pass as Pākehā, so I have a level of protection." So possibly in that sort of 10% group, it might have been, of those who said they don't experience violence, there might be some of those. And some of the free text comments, there were people who were saying, "I try to act Pākehā," and this affords them, you know, a level of protection. It's really pōti to hear this, I think. But at the same time, I think we get it. I get it.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we have a little giggle sometimes when we talk about our phone voice, our Pākehā phone voice.
Yeah. And I know, I guess for myself, you know, my name's Shirley Simmonds. If my name's seen on a piece of paper, it's not immediately evident that I'm Māori. I whakapapa Māori. So I know, and I've been aware in the past of the level of, I guess, privilege and protection that can afford me. So so that's something. I suspect in that rōpū have stated they have not experienced violence. There are those in that situation, possibly too, and I mentioned a couple of times, it really depends on us being aware of it. Some of us have these protective layers where something negative might happen and we dismiss it. We don't have the energy right now. We don't, you know, I'd rather not confront it right now, something like that. So moving on. So we have that kind of level of self-protection in a way. So that's another thing. I mean, another thought is just really being, so for example, breaches of te tiriti. It requires us to have intimate knowledge of the te tiriti and what our rights are. And we know, particularly with the education system, that this you know, we can go through the education system and not have that knowledge. So there might be some whānau out there who aren't empowered with that knowledge to be able to recognise breaches when they happen. But it is a good question, and it might be, again, like most research leads into other research, there might be another project.
Yes, and outcomes as well, measurable outcomes, which I believe that I wonder if, you know, if there is a increase in people who say they've experienced violence, whether or not that is, you know, like, how does research ensure that, I'm asking you as a researcher, that the results tell the picture and helps us to understand? So if microaggressions are a form of violence, but so normalized that I think that it's not violence, it's just normal in my life for people to treat me differently, and I don't experience it. But then I have a maramatanga or an experience, and I understanding, learning more kōrero in the whānau. And then I realize how I'm experiencing this on the daily. So there's an increase of people who say they're experiencing violence, but that could be seen as a positive thing because we're actually naming it. how do researchers like yourself tell that wider picture of numbers?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. So this survey in particular, we designed to be repeatable, and it's useful to see changes in statistics over time. But it is also, and I mentioned earlier, in a way, a learning tool. So in going through the survey, or at this point reading through the results, we get a deeper understanding of the different violences. So were we to run the survey again in 3 to 5 years' time, we could expect that there's a wider understanding amongst the Māori community of what violence is. So there's a heightened awareness, and therefore a greater perception of experiencing these things. So it's possible, if we were to repeat this survey in 5 years' time, that there will be even less people who say, I don't experience violence. Yeah.
Mm.
And that is a really good question. At the survey level, we probably couldn't dig down to get that deeper context, but
Maybe
that's
the open
where
text.
yeah, the qualitative aspect of the wider project really helps to get that wider context. Yeah.
And the open text, I mean, I'm sure that people who are listening to this corridor would love to be able to dive into more of those quotes and hear the voice. And I think that the research, what I've seen from the different presentations so far about this research, it is rich in the voices that you're bringing through. I just want to mihi to you, Shirley. Hey, we've got other kōrero here. A number of people are sharing, and please keep them coming, e te whānau. I belong to a kaupapa whānau, Orangaropu, who live, this is from Rangi Mokai, who live alcohol, drug-free, violence-free across the motu and continue to grow through our shared lived experience. I look forward to having more rōpū to be part of. We have 3 generations living alcohol, drug free violence. Engari, we are the exception, but would like to see as the norm. Mauri ora. I start my research journey a te rātou, ngā mihi. So,
Ooh,
yeah, I
oh,
mean, it feels like a movement when we hear that there are rōpū and perhaps potentially within whānau who have reached out to places like Tūtama Wahine and Awaropu experiencing that transformation. There's another pātai here. How do we take part in surveys like this? And how do we take part in this survey if it's carried out in the future?
yeah, I guess we distributed this survey through our networks, as I mentioned. And we did do some promotions via email networks, and also used social media and access sites where we knew there would be a high proportion of Māori, like I'm trying to remember now. Some of the Māori Facebook pages and so on. I can't quite remember the specifics. So really, I don't know, it really is a matter of chance if it comes across, yeah, in a way. That that response sounds like somebody who would be keen to fill out the survey, which is encouraging. I guess if there's Māori research groups. I guess if you connect with some of these networks, you have a high chance of being one of the group who receives that tool to participate in the survey. Yeah.
Yeah, and maybe through different channels of distribution, such as, I don't know, our kids are pretty active on social media, and they say, oh, go to Insta if you want this, but Facebook if you want that. There's all sorts of different sort of approaches there. Hey, we have a pātai from Lee. Whānau are watching the lateral and horizontal forms of violence around them every day and are afraid to speak out. The system set up to help them feels like a black hole that will leave them in a worse state if we dive in. How should whānau keep themselves safe?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's, I think of the sort of quote around we need to pick our battles. And if we reflect back on some of the free text responses, and I mentioned at the time, for me, it was encouraging to hear some of those people who say they advocate for their rights, they go in there and fight the battle. But we can't always do that. It's not always a safe place. We don't always have the energy to do it, or other things it might take. So I think that's a really good point. It's not set up for us to be our own advocates in a system that's not set up for us. And again, if I think back to some of the free text responses that whānau provided around keeping themselves safe and it was again all those things, engaging with our tikanga Māori where we can, connecting with whenua, finding our own safe space amongst our whānau and friends and trusted people. And keeping yourself safe might look different for different individuals and different whānau, but yeah, that's a really good partai, and it's not an easy thing to do, maintain your own safety. A lot of it's about trust. Yeah.
Yes, and maybe kaupapa that have whakapapa that have been around a long time, and people who speak for them, speak up about their services, independent people who can say, yeah, this is my experience and this was a place I went to which was a safer place for me.
Yeah. And we have a lot of really amazing providers, Māori providers now, and they do incredible work, and they work despite the colonial system, as much as possible as really strong Māori providers. So again, I'm thinking ahead to the data for those who, a number of people did seek help and support in the Māori health provider space. So it's about finding those trusted sources of support and healing.
Okay. We've just had a secondary comment from the person who asked about how do you participate in future surveys. So kia ora Kim. It was actually me asking about being part of future surveys. I found this particular hui through my network and connections with Social Link in Tauranga. Grateful to be part of this and look forward to more. Thank you. So, ai ngā mihi ki a koe e Kim. So, whare kupenga, Keith has some partai around, is it feasible to carry out a similar survey of state departments in terms of mechanisms that enable state violence? And while we are victimized by state violence, what are their key contributors that enable what are the key contributors that enable state to violate us according to their perspective?
It really comes back to the colonial context. I think it really does. It's, we live in a system that's been built by Pākehā, and therefore it's inherently a system that serves that population. So it is inherently a racist system, and this is how that manifests. And I think back to the other comment too around how do we sort of fight back against it, and it's not safe to go back and sort of advocate for your rights or say this, and that's right. It's totally true. It's not in many instances. So therefore, the system itself is set up to maintain the system as it is. It's a really difficult thing to change, but I think one of the first steps to change is information and education. So that's where we hope this study contributes to that, to revealing some of the violences that happen for our whānau, so that we can be greater empowered. It provides the rationale, and particularly in terms of numbers. Numbers are like the language of policymakers. The statistics that is their realm. So hopefully that is picked up and you know, becomes a part of transformational change.
Mm. I think about, you know, the safety of Māori working in the state space as well, and I've mihi to whānau who can experience state violence, but also potentially whānau violence through just by virtue of being in those roles. Yeah, I think that as Māori, and I think about young Hannah joining Parliament at age 21, and the experiences that she had prior to getting into Parliament. But you know, does diversity, or I shouldn't say diversity, but does showing up and being in those spaces, like there's more Māori women at the moment who have, you know, through Pāti Māori and other parties who will be in that place with her, does it offer a protection of for those in the space, or does it protect the state itself?
Yeah, tricky. I think it's really important that we're supportive of each other with those in that space, have that support network. I think it's really, really important. And I just think of, you know, quite for myself, a similar kind of scenario working in universities and so on. Having that, what is it, that whanaungatanga and people, you know, that critical mass, I guess, of Māori in there, even though we're a small group a lot of the time, is really important. It's so hard to stand alone in those spaces. So I guess for us, it's important that we reach out to each other and ensure that we know we're there for each other as much as we can. That gives us strength. Yeah, but not easy. And I'm just thinking to the other part of your question around does you know, having more people in the system serve to support the system? Yeah, it's a tricky one, and I know there's you know, there's people that sit on either side of that debate. I guess the thing is, you know, I think back to Moana Jackson's work and his talk around constitutional transformation, and you know, that is our ideal, where we can stand as Māori and be in the position of making our own decisions for ourselves and for our whānau and for our mokopuna. That's the ideal. But in the meantime, we're in a system where we're not fully empowered to make our decisions. So there does need to be some of us working from within the system to change it from within, I think.
Thank you. We have a comment from Sienna. Thank you for responding to my statement. It'd be great to see a matrix created to demonstrate the relationship of vertical violence, state, colonial, systemic, on horizontal violence, lateral, interpersonal. You're presenting the second part of the survey. Is that sort of is that a part of the connecting and the matrix that Sienna's mentioning?
Yeah, I totally agree. And as we were doing the study, you know, you try to visualize how it might, you know, an infographic or something that might demonstrate the connections. I think that would be a great thing that comes out of this work. It might be a further piece of work. It's not something we've included at this point. I think possibly it needs more research to kind of really demonstrate those connections between state violence and interpersonal violence. As I mentioned before, you know, we know they're there. We know that's a big reason for our experiences of interpersonal violences. I feel it probably for a matrix like that to be really robust, it probably does need some more delving into those connections. But this is a really definite start towards that. I think that's an excellent suggestion to provide a matrix. Those kind of visuals have an important place, I think, in mapping our understanding of the, you know, the nature of these interactions. Yeah, kia ora.
How do you look after yourself, Shirley? As you know, we'll have people who are listening to this kōrero for their own professional development as researchers or practitioners, caring and supporting whānau healing. How do you keep yourself buoyant, resilient, And how do you stop yourself from getting so effed off, excuse my
Yeah.
language, or angry or pody?
Yeah, yeah, and that's he pātai pai. For me personally, you know, I'm a researcher. I work from home. This is my safe space. So I am very often conscious that I work from my safe space behind a computer screen with the data, um, and particularly working with some of the practitioners in this study here, and knowing that they work at the interface of whānau, I was conscious of that. So again, want to really mihi to those who work directly with our whānau who are affected by this, because he mahi nui. Again, for me personally, the things that fuel my mauri ora or fill my cup are diving into the mara, hanging out with my kids. I love reo. I love the ongoing process of learning our our tupuna language, and reclaiming those practices as much as we can. And I mentioned, you know, in my mihi earlier, that one of our our little whānau here is in a state of transition and moving towards home. So we're moving to Patararu literally next month, and that's a part of that ongoing healing and finding ways that we can contribute to our wider whānau marae and hapu. I guess that's it for me. But I do know there's been times when I've literally had to shut my laptop and cry. That, you know, I'm conscious that every statistic that I might work, you know, every number on the screen that I might work with is a whānau member, and particularly with this study, like I mentioned earlier, the amazing amount of free text responses that came through. I mean, I know some of the whānau who answered this 15-minute survey would have taken more than an hour to fill that in. And really, really appreciate that. And I do hope that we, in the survey write-up, do justice to that. Because it's like, yeah, one of the key things is, I think I think it's important to be heard. So for me as a researcher and reading all those responses, I felt I was hearing and a real intimate side to whānau experiences. So I'm really appreciative of that.
Hi, Shirley, I think this might be our final questions from Richard. Oh, maybe not. We've got another. If lateral violence is so far-reaching, how might we look after the healers of whom work alongside those who are affected most directly by violence?
Yeah, again, a good question. I think our own, you know, and I just sort of, I guess, describe some of the things that are, for me, things that keep me safe and healthy, a wairua, a hinengaro, as much as possible. And it might look different for different practitioners and so on, but I think that's a good question, and ensuring that we, as a collective, help serve those who serve us, so help maintain the well-being of those who are in a healing role, because it's such an important role. Yeah, I don't have a direct answer for that question, but it is certainly something that I think we need to be really conscious of.
And maybe, you know, in past generations, and maybe for some whānau, they still practice, but, you know, churches would be a place where we would tithe, or koha would be the currency or the energy transfer in marae environments. But when we move away from home, or for whatever reason, we may not be fortunate enough to be able to transfer. Maybe that could be something that is considered. How do we give to kaupapa? How, you know, how more, so that they're not dependent on one source of funding or anything like that. How do we fill the pot and ensure that the pāhara keke is well looked after? But Rangi Mokai has a kōrero here. about language. Kia ora, I work for Oranga Tamariki and I'm Samoan, German, Jew, Māori, Welsh, raised European, experienced extreme violence through whānau state colonial systems, and I was told about trauma and I learned a coined term, cruelty-based trauma, and my research journey has come because of the word trauma, which sounds traumatic, and I'd like to see more research on language because language matters. What are your thoughts on language?
Oh, yeah. Totally total ko there. And I think I really agree. I think language matters, and the language we're exposed to really matters because that impacts on our, it contributes to creating our own internal voice. So I think back to the earlier question around that sort of internalized oppression, and if we are exposed to these violences, and a lot of those violences can be in language, and by language I'm thinking of all the things that come with language. So not just the words, but the body language that comes with it, the um, inflections, the raised eyebrows, the rolled eyes, or whatever that might come along with that a negative language experience. That whole sort of package can really impact us and contribute to our internal voice, and then that becomes that internalized oppression that we talked about earlier. So I agree. It's it's a really important thing. But I think too, the flip side of that is that we can use language in healing. So positive, authentic, empowering language can serve to empower us as well. So yeah, thank you for that comment. I think it's a really important point.
Ai rawe, and from Robert, ma mai tōku ngā kau, every stat is a whānau member. Shirley, that was something that you've just said, and it's really resonated, I can see, and I felt that too. I just want to mihi to you. We've come to the end of our time together for this session, and we're looking forward to our next session with you at 12 o'clock. I just... thank you. Thank you for all the mahi that you do. And, I felt that you somewhat sounded apologetic that you were working from your safe place. Let that be our aspiration for all people, and that we don't have to feel embarrassed that we have that. You're actually also opening yourself up to the rawness of people's experiences as well. So thank you for sharing your strategies around hanging out with the kids and Mara and everything that you've shared today. Do you have any last comments before we wrap up with karakia?
Kei te pai, me mihi kia koe hene rangi. E mihi hoki kia koutou katoa e hono mai nei, whakarongo mai nei, e tākuha mai o koutou kutuhu. Mihi nui.
Ana, tēnā no koe. E te whānau hoki mai ra, hei te pautūtanga o tēnei rā, hoki mai ki ngā kōrero o Shirley, e pāna ki tēnei mahi rangahau, he waka eke noa. Hoki mai me o pātai, hoki mai me o kōrero, ngā taumahatanga ki runga i a koe, i a tātou, kawea mai, kia rongo tātou i era auetanga, kia rongo tātou i ngā rongoa mō tērā kaupapa. So hoki mai. Kia hiki i era taumata, kia kimi i ngā kupu no rātou mā, kia unuhia. Kia unuhia, ana ko tērā kupu he unuhia, kia puta tātou, kia kawe, kia puta tātou ki tēnā wahanga anō o tō tātou rā. Unuhia i tūru tapunui, kia wātea, kia māma, te ngākau, te tinana, te hinengaro, te mauri, te wairua i te ara takatū. Koia rā e rongo, whakairi ake ki runga, kia wātea, ai rā, kua wātea, pau pai mariri. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora.